Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hip Knit Hooray Online, and this is podcast episode number 6, where I'm going to be chatting about unfinished objects, some whips that I have, a few plans, and acquisitions. Just wanted to say a huge thank you for all the positive feedback and encouragement that I got from my last video, my stash organization and plans for a low buy year. It was really fun to film that and reorganize my stash and also just put my thoughts down onto paper and just think about what I want to be doing this year in terms of using from stash and just be more intentional about my making. And I'm glad that that resonated with a lot of people. It's gonna be really exciting to film a mid-year update and then an end of the year update. But so far it's been working really well, my low buy year plans. I've been working away from stash with some of the projects that I have that I'm going to be sharing today. Probably I'm not going to share month by month of yarn tracking and usage. I think it's just going to be a little bit too technical, and then I just don't know how it's going to impact like my filming schedule, because I might want to spontaneously film a podcast, and I don't know, I'm just not going to do that, but I'll stick to doing like a mid-year and then an end of the year update, and hopefully that in those updates I will have some positive news to share about using from stash. So let's jump into finished objects. So I have one to share here. This was a whip in the last episode and I now finished it. It's the Cognac Sweater by Atelier Castin. This was a test knit that I did for Marine. This is a top-down contiguous set-in sleeve sweater or blouse, depending on the finishing that you use. And it's just so lovely. I really love it. So let's get into the details of what I used. So the yarn that I used, sorry to grab it from my bed. The yarn that I used was Cascade Heritage, which is a superwash merino and nylon wool in the shade Camel. So I have some leftovers so I can show what the yarn looks like. So I used that, and then I held it with Filcolana Tillia, which is I guess technically my second time working with this yarn, but it's because I used this yarn before in my Soon sweater. I frogged it and then I used it again. So it was really nice being able to use this mohair, because actually I really love this mohair. It's probably in my top 3 mohairs that I've used and knit with before. So yes, Filcolana Tillia. Did I mention the shade name? I can't remember. I think it's in the shade Camel. So both in the shade Camel, and held together, it creates just a really soft and drapey fabric. I purchased the Cascade Heritage a few years ago now, probably in late 2019, from Shirley Baxter Knits on Etsy. It's a yarn store that's based somewhere out of Nova Scotia, but I think they've since permanently closed the Etsy store. I don't know about the online store, but I don't see it anymore on Etsy. But I purchased this from there. I purchased 2 hanks of Cascade Heritage, which at the time it was $14 each. So $28 for the Cascade Heritage. The Filcolana Tillia I purchased probably in 2022 from Knit or knit.co.uk. At the time, that was the only place I could find Filcolana Tillia. There's now a more local option to me, Galt House of Yarn, based out of Cambridge, Ontario. But at the time, I only saw it on Knit's website. So I placed an order for 4 skeins of this yarn, and it was $12. Let me just check. Yeah, I bought them for $12 and I got 4 of them, so $48. So in total, this project cost me about $76 to make. So let's get into the process of constructing this garment and the modifications that I made. So I knit a size 3, which is approximately a finished bust circumference of 102. I went for something that has a little bit more ease. I think the suggested ease in the pattern is a little bit less than what I went for, but I would say it's still a perfectly fitted garment. It's like not too oversized, but not too fitted on me. This is knit with 6mm needles. So with fingering and mohair held together, it creates a pretty airy gauge, but with it being merino, it still has some really nice drape, and the finished fabric is, I would say, lightweight but not sheer. Like when I wear this sweater, I don't usually wear anything underneath, like a tank or a tee, and I don't think it's see-through at all. It's very comfortable. Maybe I can like try and show what the finished fabric looks like. Is that helpful? But it's not sheer is the point that I'm trying to put across. So I really like the finished fabric. This is constructed from the top down. So you first cast on at the back. You cast on stitches and shape the back with short rows. So you get a nice slant along the back. Then after you've worked the back panel, you pick up stitches for the front panels, the front two panels, and you work them, I would say like a pretty short amount. You can see in my last podcast episode where I had just joined in the round, I believe. So you work it for a pretty short panel, you work the panel for a pretty short section before you pick up stitches along the sleeve here, and then you join the work in the round. The collar is shaped with short rows once you join in the round, which I would say is a different construction than what I'm used to. It was a little bit fiddly to work the short rows because once you pick up the stitches for the sleeves and then you join the work in the round, you're working short rows on the newly casted on stitches. And as you know, when you're knitting the first round of stitches that you just cast on, they can get a little bit loose. Tension can get a little bit tricky. So I would say that those short rows were like tad fiddly to work up, but it creates a really nice rounded neckline. It's a really nice fit, and it does look a little bit gapey when you first knit it, but you pick up stitches after that to work the I-cord edging, or you can do twisted rib, but I think the I-cord just really cleans it up. I picked up stitches for the I-cord collar with a 5mm needle, so I went a size down and it just tightened it up a little bit more, which I prefer the look of that. So once you knit that collar, then you're working increases to shape the sleeves, and I absolutely love how the sleeves fit on this sweater. You can see here that there's like a gentle slope of increases. It creates a really nice fit along the shoulder because it's nice and tight to your shoulder, but it's a very relaxed fit around the body. So that's all achieved through increases. I'll show the back as well. And then once you're ready to split for sleeves and the body, you put the stitches on hold, you knit the body, and then you knit the sleeves. I knit the body of mine. I would say that this sweater is more cropped. I knit mine 3 centimeters longer, so just a little bit longer, and I shortened the sleeves by about 8 centimeters, which has since been modified in the pattern. The sleeves have been shortened a little bit based off of tester feedback, so that'll be a little bit different in the pattern. And then I finished it off with I-cord edging. Overall, I'm really happy with the garment. I think it's constructed in a very intuitive way, and it has some great design details that are going to create a really nice fit. In terms of the pattern, I hadn't knit any patterns from Atelier Castin before from Marine, but I think this one is really well written. It's very detailed. There's quite a few video tutorials, helpful links. There's schematics and diagrams of how to pick up stitches, and then at the very end there's charts for the garment, and I haven't really followed charts before. I didn't really use them for this construction just because I'm not really used to it before. I'm just used to following the written instructions, but if you wanted to try knitting from a chart, or if you find that easier, those are at the end of the pattern. And as I mentioned already, the finished fabric is very airy and it has a great drape. This is achieved through 6mm needles, and so because of that, you don't need a lot of meterage to knit an entire sweater. For size 3, I needed 690 meters of wool and mohair. I think in the pattern it's just over 700 meters. So that might have been because of my gauge, and also I did shorten the length of the sleeves. So that might have been the reason, but regardless, or just in general, you don't need a lot of meterage to knit this sweater. I would say all sizes, you need less than 3 skeins of a 100-gram fingering weight wool. And for some sizes, you need less than 2, such as my size 3, you would need less than 800 meters, which would be approximately 2 100-gram skeins of fingering weight wool. So I would say this is a great pattern if you wanted to use or splurge on some more special hand-dyed yarn. Some of the testers used some gorgeous hand-dyed yarn, so check out the hashtag to see some of those samples. Another pattern that uses a pretty low meterage that's pretty popular is the Lento, which was a pattern in Lane magazine, and I would say this is a fantastic alternative to that. That one is a pretty similar gauge. That one is 15 stitches instead of 16 stitches for every 10 centimeters. And that one is a top-down raglan construction with 3/4 length sleeves. I didn't look at the yardage or meterage estimates for the Lento, but I just know through word of mouth or hearing a lot of other knitters knit this pattern before, the Lento, that it uses a pretty low meterage. I think this is a fantastic alternative. I personally prefer the construction of this one because I really like the set-in sleeves and I like the lower neckline of this garment. So check both of those patterns out, but I think this one is a really fantastic alternative. In terms of the testing experience, I don't normally touch on this when I talk about test knits, or I haven't in the past, but I just thought this one was great the way that Maureen ran it. She fostered a really positive environment for all the testers. She was very flexible to allowing testers to make modifications to make the garment fit you better, which I always appreciate because sometimes designers can be pretty strict on not making modifications, which I understand because they want the fit to be how it's suggested in the pattern and also for yardage or meterage estimates. But she was really flexible, which was great. Like I was able to shorten the sleeves. Maybe I have shorter arms, but I was able to do that or extend the body. So that was really helpful. I thought that she made the testing experience really genuine as well. Like in the tester feedback form, she had a question in there asking about how the experience was as a tester and if she could do anything to improve in the future, which is just so kind, I would say, like for a designer to think about that. And I'm not saying that designers are mean and they don't care about that, but I just thought Maureen like took that extra step. And then the last thing at the end, when she sent out the final pattern, she summarized and explained the changes that she made to the pattern based off of tester feedback, which I think is so important because you just feel really appreciated as a tester when a designer really takes your feedback seriously and into account with the design. So she explained the changes that she made based off of feedback and overall like how it improved the pattern, which I thought was a really nice touch. And not all designers have to do that. They do take tester feedback into consideration, but they don't explain it like that. And I thought that was really unique. So if you are interested in test knitting in the future, I'd highly recommend that you apply to test knit Maureen's designs. I do want to say I'm just getting over like a pretty bad cold, or maybe the flu. I'm not really sure. It wasn't really confirmed what it was, but I am getting over that. So if my voice sounds a little bit scratchy, or there might be like quite a few cuts in this video just because of that. I'm feeling better now, so that's why I'm able to podcast again, but yeah, I just wanted to explain. So now moving on to my whips. I have a few whips here. The first one is one that is not new to the podcast, and I was trying so hard to finish this whip because I really wanted it to be a finished object in this podcast. Like I was staying up late trying to finish it, and I just thought to myself one day, I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I trying to finish this sweater and stress myself out? And that is not something that I want to do. I don't want to be stressing out over something that is my hobby. I should be enjoying making this sweater because it's been such an enjoyable experience so far that why am I trying to stress myself out for the podcast? So this isn't a finished object, but I'm sure not anyone really even cared about that. But I am going to be talking about it again for the 4th time, which is why like I felt kind of guilty not finishing it so I could just like wrap it up. But I didn't, and I'm almost there. So as I mentioned, I started this in September, so it's been in my podcast for a while, maybe even since the first podcast episode. But if you're new here, or if you don't remember the yarn that I'm using Lion Brand Wool Ease in the shade Linen and Drops Kid Silk in the shade Light Beige. So I was almost finished. I think at the time when I had last podcast, I think I was working on one of the sleeves. So I've since finished both of the sleeves. And then I am onto the body right now. I placed the needles on stitch holders, and I haven't touched it since because I've needed the needles for another project. But I will probably put them back on this tonight and then finish this soon. So I just have a few centimeters left of the body, and then I'm gonna work the split hem. So not too much to update on this. I will say though that I am going to try some of the feedback that I got from the Everything I Knit in 2023 video. A lot of people left comments, very helpful comments in that video when I was talking about how I didn't like the ribbing of my port sweater and how it cinched in a lot. And I think the reason why is because I was using 100% acrylic yarn. This is an acrylic wool blend, but it is still a majority acrylic. So I think what I'm going to do is, for the ribbing, I'm going to do a bit of an experiment. I usually don't size down for the ribbing. I think it's because my ribbing tension can be quite tight. So a lot of designers, they suggest that you size down. I usually don't, and I use the same needle size, but you'll see even in the port sweater, it did cinch in quite a bit. So I don't know if this is gonna be a good idea, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try and actually size up for the ribbing. So I knit this with 5.5 millimeter needles. I'm gonna size up to 6 millimeter, and we're gonna see how that goes. If it is flaring out already before blocking, I'll just frog it back and use the 5.5 millimeter needles again. But I'm gonna try that because it is kind of hard to stretch a majority acrylic yarn into a shape while blocking. It kind of just cinches in after. It's just not as flexible as wool. So I'm gonna try that to see, and then if that doesn't work, I'm going to try out the other tip that people left in that video, which is to steam block the ribbing. Or I think some people said to even steam block the whole thing, but I might just try to steam block just the ribbing instead of just like a wet block with lukewarm water. I'll try steaming it and we'll see how that goes. So not that much to update on this one, but we're almost there. My next WIP is one that I am equally excited and nervous about because it's my first colorwork sweater project. It's the Wave Sweater by Spectacle Streak. So this pattern is in Spectacle Streak's book Gentag, I think is what it's called. And that book is only available right now in Danish. However, due to very popular requests, demands maybe, me released the pattern in English earlier on in the year in January. And then to mark that, she's hosting a Wave Sweater Cal over on Instagram. And I was totally sucked into the knit along because I just saw some great color inspiration and I loved the design. I first saw it in the book, but then you are able to get the book, but because it's only in Danish and it would be like a print copy, I think it'd be a little bit hard to translate. You can always use your phone and Google Translate, but I didn't want to do that. And so I always really liked the sweater, but now that it's released in English, I purchased that single pattern and I wanted to knit this with a few combinations. I posted on my Instagram story, maybe I'll put a photo like here off to this side. A color combination. It was brown and green, but I wasn't sure if I had enough yarn for the contrast wave color. But I saw a few weeks later after the pattern was released on Ravelry that someone had knit a size small medium, and the amount of yarn that they needed for the wave contrast color was a lot lower than what the pattern suggested. So I was like, maybe I could do this. And I shamelessly messaged a few people on Instagram that had knit the sweater before. And I think they had knit a small medium, it looked like it. So I just messaged them and I asked them how much yarn they used for the waves. And it was pretty similar, like it was around 450 meters. I think all three of them said around that amount, which is less than what the pattern suggests on the pattern listing. So that got me thinking. I was like, actually, I could probably do that, and then I could participate in the knit along. So I am using this combination here. So this was part of that initial envisioning for the sweater. This is Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool in the shade Nature's Brown, and it's a pretty warm toned medium brown, and it's 100% wool. I really like using this yarn. I would say it's like pretty woolly, not itchy, I would say, but it's definitely very rustic. And I've used this before for my Minto sweater, and I held it with mohair. I really liked it, and it's a pretty economical yarn for getting 100% wool. You get 425 meters for every 227 grams, so it's like pretty specific, the meterage, but you get a decent amount of yarn for every ball or skein of yarn. So I'm using that. And I initially was thinking of using that green yarn, or maybe the Cascade 220 that I hold in almost every single video, it seems like, in this cobalt blue. But from what I heard, using superwash wool is a pretty big no-no for color work, because you want the yarn to be like a little bit sticky, which you get with non-superwash or non-treated wool. So I decided I'm not going to use the green yarn because I wasn't really sure about gauge. It's a fingering weight wool, and then I could hold it double, so that wasn't working. Then I wanted to use the Cascade 220, but because it's superwash, I was like, no. And then I thought about the Originally Lovely Fluff yarn in the shade Lapis, which is, I wouldn't say it's like a bright cobalt blue, but it's pretty electric, I would say. So I decided I'll use that. This is a 70% baby alpaca, 7% merino, 23% polyamide blown yarn. And I had 4 balls of this yarn. It's 130 meters for every 50 grams. And I thought this would work really well for the waves because it is a little bit fluffy, as the name suggests, being fluff. But just for even more fluff, I decided to hold it with Knit Picks Aloft mohair in the shade Celestial, which I got from my latest Knit Picks haul. I intended to use it for another colorwork sweater, but it's okay. I'm gonna hold it with this because I think it's a really great combination. So I'm using those 2 yarns, and this is my progress so far. I've made a few modifications to the pattern, which is why I'm pretty nervous, because I would say like I'm kind of winging this. And it's also my first colorwork sweater, which I kind of realize now that maybe I was being like a little bit ambitious doing a colorwork sweater for one of my first colorwork projects. So if this doesn't really work out, I kind of have only myself to blame, but it's okay. I think it's going pretty good so far. I have been watching a few tutorials though on stranded colorwork and how to keep an even tension, and also Me of Spectacle Streak has released some videos for the wave sweater, and one of the tutorials was how to knit the colorwork in the sweater, so I've kind of been following that. I know that there's a general rule to catch your floats every 5 or so stitches or every inch, whichever one I think applies more to your project. But in Me's tutorial for the color work, she doesn't actually catch her floats, and some of the gaps between the different colors is pretty long. So I decided to catch my floats first, but it was kind of messing up my tension, probably because it's the first time that I've done it so far, so I just need to practice it more. But I ended up not catching my floats, so there are certain areas here where the color works, there's I think 12 stitches maximum, around 10 to 12 stitches between the colors. So yeah, I'm not catching the floats, but I think the tension is okay. Like it's getting pretty squished on these needles, but I've tried to keep the floats pretty loose, and so far I think like there isn't too much puckering, and the tension, like it looks okay right now. So I might do a mid-project block once I've done like one of the waves to see how it looks, or just at least take it off of the needles where it's a bit more squished and just lay it out and see how it's working. And then if it's too tight, I'll just rip back and I'll redo it. That's why I have this yarn here. I inserted a lifeline right before I started the color work, just in case I needed to rip back. I've already had to do it once before because I didn't like how it looked when I was catching my float. So this is my second time trying to do the color work again. And so far, I think it's going okay. Maybe, I don't know if this is gonna be like a good gauge, but maybe if I show the floats, does that look okay? I thought it did when I was looking at like the tutorial videos and tip videos on stranded color work, but maybe they're too loose. Maybe they're okay. Maybe they're too tight. I really don't know. This is kind of an experimental project for me. Overall, I'm really happy with how the color work is turning out so far, at least how it looks, the two colors together. I think it's really striking, and there's enough of a contrast between the two where I think you're gonna really see the waves and they're really gonna pop. I haven't worked the full wave yet, but just looking off of how much I've done so far. I have made some modifications to the beginning of the pattern, which I hope are going to pay off. And there's also an error in the pattern, so I did want to speak on that right now. So the modification that I made was in the pattern, you're supposed to cast on with an Italian cast on or a tubular cast on and work the neck right away, and then you start knitting the body of the sweater. I didn't do that, as you can see. I just cast on stitches with a long tail cast on and started knitting the body of the sweater right away. And then after that, I'm going to pick up stitches along my cast on edge and then work the neckline. Another modification that I did was, in addition to casting on stitches to work the body right away, I also adjusted the initial number of cast on stitches. I wanted to do an extra set of short rows. Once you are knitting the body of the sweater, before you start the color work, you're knitting short rows. So you can see it's raised at the back. This is the back, and then this is the front here before you work the color work. So it's just one row before you work the color work. You are knitting short rows to raise the back of the neck so it fits a little bit better around your shoulders. And I wanted to do an additional set of short rows, and this sweater is constructed with a traditional raglan increase. So while you're doing the short rows, you are increasing. So I decreased 8 stitches from the initial cast on so I could do that set of short rows again. And the reason why I did both of those modifications is because I want the neckline of the sweater to be more fitted. When I was looking at the product photos on the pattern and then as well in the hashtag, I noticed that the neckline for the wave sweater is quite loose, or sometimes it's quite loose on some knitters and then sometimes it's tighter. And personally, I prefer the look of it being tighter. I kind of wanted it to look like my port sweater neckline, which is nice and fitted, more of a, I guess, turtleneck or a tighter turtleneck, and I wanted that look. So I figured that by doing that long tail cast on and then picking up stitches after, I can decide later how long I want the neckline to be. And also I could kind of adjust it where I can pick up less stitches or knit with an even smaller needle size to try and get that neckline to fit a little bit tighter. I don't know how it's going to work. I hope that modification pays off. I guess you'll see as the project progresses how it works and whether or not I recommend that modification in the future. But I'm hoping that overall that's going to create a tighter neckline. And then the additional short rows as well, I think should help with that shoulder shaping, with it being fitting closer up to my neck. I'm definitely not going to finish before the knit along ends. It was only for 1 month, but it was nice to be able to see all the new inspiration through the hashtag. And so far, yeah, I'm enjoying how the sweater is knitting up. There is one error, I think, in the pattern, which I didn't discover myself. I learned this from Millie of Millie is Making on Instagram. We were both chatting about how we are going to knit the sweater, and she had started the sweater before me, so she had cast it on, and she had said that she thought that the increases are the wrong way for when you're working back on the short rows, when you're purling stitches. So the first row of the short rows you're knitting, and then you're making that return through purls to shape the short rows on the other side. And she said that she thinks that the make one left purl and make one right purl should be flipped. And so I kept that in mind when I started knitting, and I agree. I think that the make one right and make one left purl stitches should be the other way in the pattern, because the make one left and make one right stitches are slanted a certain way from that central raglan stitch, and when you're doing them the way that they're specified in the pattern, they start pointing towards the raglan stitch rather than pointing away. So thank you, Millie, for pointing that out to me. And yeah, I would agree that if you are doing this pattern and you're working those short rows, I would just flip the orientation of those increases. So I hope that this is fixed soon in the pattern, but just keep that in mind if you do want to cast this on. And other than that, I'm really enjoying the process, but yeah, hopefully this color work is going to turn out well, but I'm really excited for the sweater. My next whip is a pair of socks. So 2024 I said was going to be my year of knitting socks, or at least trying to knit socks and see how I like them. So I have cast on the Sunday socks by Petite Knit. I've knit this much so far, my first sock. I initially wanted to knit the Camp Socks by Ozetta. That was in my 2024 knitting plans for my first pair of socks, but I changed my mind because I really like how Haley writes her patterns. I really enjoy Ozetta patterns. However, my row gauge is always a little bit off from Haley's. I think she is more of a tighter knitter, and I think that's the case rather than me being a very loose knitter, because I know other testers that I've knit with before have said that their row gauge is also a little bit off. And that's okay. Like, I usually just factor for that because she includes measurements in the pattern, so I can just adjust my row gauge based off of those specifications, which is really helpful. But I thought for my first sock, I didn't really want to be trying to adjust my gauge. I really just wanted to follow the pattern as it is and not have to worry about making additional modifications. So I decided to do the Sunday socks because my gauge is pretty similar, almost the same to Petite Knit gauge. So yeah, I changed my mind and I'm doing that. And it's also a rib sock, so I think that if my gauge, or if I don't knit exactly to gauge, it still has a decent chance of fitting me because it's ribbed. So the Sunday sock, I'm sure, doesn't really need a ton of introduction. It's a very popular pattern by Petite Knit, but it's a top-down 2x2 rib sock knit with worsted weight yarn. I'm using Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight in the shade Haze Heather, which is 100 meters for every 50 grams. It is 100% Peruvian Highland wool, which is the same composition that is suggested in the pattern, but I am a little bit worried about it because there's no nylon, so I don't know how it's going to hold up. However, I did have 2 skeins of this yarn already in stash, and I thought, you know what, for my first pair of socks, I'll just use what I already have in stash. So if I had like maybe a strand of fingering weight wool in the same shade, or like fingering sock weight in the same shade, I would have used that to reinforce it. But right now I don't have that, so this yarn is knit with 100% Peruvian Highland wool. And I am having so much fun knitting these socks. I'm knitting on my double pointed needles because I didn't want to do magic loop. I just don't really like magic loop, and so I thought for my first sock I'll use double pointed needles, which I prefer. I have a pair of short circulars, so I probably will knit the second pair or the second sock of this pair with double pointed needles just to fix gauge, but I do have plans to knit another DK weight sock after this one with a different heel construction, different stitch counts, so I might try using the small circulars for that sock. The pattern suggests a long tail cast on, and I did a pretty loose long tail cast on. I initially tried to do a German twisted cast on, but it left like a pretty distinct purl bump at the top, and I just didn't think it was that seamless, or for some reason it was bothering me, so I decided to go back to what the pattern says and just cast on pretty loosely. And it is pretty stretchy, and it does fit around the leg of it does fit around my calf. I've already tried on these socks. So I knit the 2x2 ribbing for the body, the leg of the foot, the leg of the sock, I should say. But I did shorten it by about 7 centimeters then in the pattern specifications. I think because these socks are supposed to be more slouchy, the leg of the sock is quite long, but I just didn't want that, so I shortened the length. And then I started working the heel flap and gusset. And then I've done the gusset decreases. So now I'm just onto knitting in the round until I'm ready to shape the decreases for the toe. And I am so happy that I started knitting socks, because this right here, the heel flap and gusset, was actually really fun to knit. It's relatively quick. I would say that I did need to do it in one sitting, just because I was already in a groove and I didn't want to lose my concentration. So I did do this all in one sitting, but it was really fun to work up. The only thing is, with this heel flap and gusset instructions, I was noticing I was getting like quite a big gap in between the stitches that I was picking up, because you're supposed to pick up every other round, which was leaving a lot of holes. So I ended up picking up stitches, like picking up 2 rows of stitches for every 1 stitch, like going into both of those stitches, if that's making sense. And then I was also, the following round, I was like going into other stitches and then knitting 2 together. And it created like a tighter fit along here. So there's not really any holes anymore, but I don't know if you were supposed to do that. And I don't think it made the foot too tight, but that's how I was able to get no holes here. Otherwise, I think that this section would have been like pretty gapey. So hopefully I did that right. But it's created like a pretty clean finish, I would say. And so in my second sock, I'm gonna do the same thing. I don't exactly remember how I did it, but I'm gonna try and pick up randomly in different areas and knitting it together to avoid that. But so far, I'm really enjoying knitting these socks. I'm really happy, and these are gonna be a nice lounge pair of socks to wear around the house. I think a little bit thick to wear in my boots, but nice to wear around the house. And now moving on to my plans. I really want to knit a beanie for myself. I haven't knit a beanie yet this winter season. I usually knit my boyfriend a hat, but I haven't this year. I'm gonna knit myself a hat. And I decided I'm going to use a pattern that I've knit before. This is the Sharpei beanie, which is a design by Nabita of Creadia Studio. And I've knit a few of Nabita's designs before, and I just love her, all of her designs and the way that she does write patterns. So this hat was actually a secret test knit that I did for Nabita last year, I would say like late winter, early spring. And it was a secret test knit because it's part of Lane's newest book, 52 Weeks of Accessories, which is now available for pre-order. So maybe I'll link the pre-order page down below, because I'm very interested in maybe pre-ordering as well. But this is one of the 52 patterns in the book. So I knit this version, and I really love how it fits. It has like a shorter brim. Maybe I'll try it on now. So I've been wearing this hat a lot this winter. It has a bit more of a shorter brim. It fits closer to your head. The brim of the hat is extra thick and squishy, and it uses a plisé stitch, which is a stitch pattern that's already in a few of Nabita's other designs, like the Sharpei sweater. So it's extra squishy. I'll unfold the beanie for you so you can see. So you first cast on here with a magic ring cast on, and then you're working increases at 4 different areas to shape the crown of the hat. And then you're just working in the round for a pretty short period of time because it is a shorter brim. Then, similar to the Oslo hat, you knit a German short row to flip the direction of the knitting. And then you are knitting a double knit brim with stockinette on one side and then that plisé stitch on the other, and then it folds over and you get a really cozy hat. So I've decided to knit this beanie again over all the other beanies that are out in the knitting world market right now, because I just really like how the hat fits, and I also like how it's constructed top down. You can just maximize the amount of yarn that you have, and I think it makes it easier to try on the hat as you go because you have the increases here, and you can just increase until you have your head circumference and what's comfortable to wear. So I really like that. And I liked following these instructions for the brim because I'm going to be using a pretty squishy yarn you're going to see, and I just thought that it would just work better to use this rather than for example like the Oslo hat, which I already have in my pattern library. So these are the yarns I'm going to be using for my second version. This is boucle, and then this is merino wool. So for the top of the hat, I decided to use the leftovers that I have from the Earth pullover that I knit last year. So this is Loops and Threads Cozy Wool Merino, which is a merino and acrylic blend. And I'm going to be holding it with, this is Wendy Air, which is a yarn brand that I'm not that familiar with, but I got it from the Wool Mill, which is in Toronto, and it was pretty affordable at the time. I think it was like $9, either $8 or $9 for a skein of mohair, so that's why I got it. It's a little bit more of a thicker mohair. It's 200 meters for every 25 grams. So still lace weight, but on the heavier side of lace weight. So I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be using this combination for the crown and the top of the hat, and then for the brim I decided I'm going to be using the leftover boucle yarn for the double folded brim. I'm really excited. I don't know how this is going to look with boucle. I really don't like working with boucle yarn that much because I find that your needle can get caught in these loops and it kind of slows you down, but I just thought it would be so cute in another Sharpei beanie. So this is my plan. This is my plan for the next few weeks, and hopefully I'll finish it while it's still cold enough to wear a hat. And now moving on to acquisitions. So I have some project bags to share from the Knitting Swan. So Tao, who's the owner of the Knitting Swan, reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in receiving some of her bags as a gift. So I did want to disclaim that these two bags were gifted to me. I first came across the Knitting Swan around the holiday season. The project bags that she creates came up on my feed, and I just thought it was so gorgeous. I clicked her page, and I saw that she's a small business based in the UK that she creates these project bags that are made with custom printed fabric. That's what really caught my eye, because I saw if you follow her on Instagram, she has a more behind the scenes look of how the bags are created, and the fabric is 100% cotton, and it's custom printed with different designs of hers, and you can see how it's printed on her Instagram, which is really cool. So yeah, I was really interested in the bags. At the time she just had this print, and she's since come out with this second print as well. So I'll get into the bag. So this one is the Flower Doodles large project bag, and you'll see it has like a pretty sturdy round base at the bottom. It's a quilted fabric that's 100% cotton and has this really cute print on it. I really love all the little flowers. And then there's a drawstring top with like a rope cord here, and you open it up. I have some yarn in there already just to show how it would look, but this bag can fit, I'd say, like 7 to 10 skeins pretty comfortably. I have all the yarn that I would need to knit a sweater for my size in here of Santa's Garden Sunday and Jobs Kids Silk. And then there's 6 interior pockets on the inside. Since Tao is also a knitter, I think she really understands what goes into creating project bags and well-designed project bags. So this has 6 pockets on the inside, which you can use to store notions, and I really like how this bag just fully opens up, and you can just set it on the ground and pick up your project from it and knit while keeping the yarn inside the bag. Keeps things really organized. So this was the first project bag, and then the second one is the Darling Roses project tote, which is her new collection or new fabric line. So there are several different types of project bags. I just have 2 of them here, but there's different ones. Again, I'll link the site down below so you can check it out. But this one is the same cotton lining. It seems like the same cotton outside or shell and lining on the inside, but this one is just not quilted. This tote is, let's say, like a medium size, and it has this like tennis skirt, retro tennis skirt frill at the bottom, which Tao noted on the website is to hide the bulk at the bottom of the tote, which I thought was really cool, something different. And then inside, this tote also has pockets, and I would say these ones are much deeper or larger pockets. I think it can hold A5 pattern book inside one of them, and they're just like wider. I think that they can hold skeins of yarn more comfortably, so I think this could work really well if you're working on like a smaller medium-sized color work project, and you can actually put the yarn into the different pockets. So this tote is really fun as well. I will say though, I think I prefer the large project tote just on first impression, because I like how you can set this down on the ground and then open it up fully while keeping your yarn inside. Well, this one is like a little bit more floppy, like it doesn't really stand up on its own, but I guess it's more up to project preferences. Like if you are working with more like sweater quantities, then maybe this size would work, but if you're knitting more like color work or smaller project accessories and you want to take your knitting as well as other things on the go, this one is definitely more portable. Now I'm really interested in trying out the yarn bag. That's a similar size to project bags that I already use, and I really like how the fabric is really sturdy, like your needles won't poke through compared to the project bags that I use now. The needles always poke through, so if Tao ever comes out with a third fabric line, then I may look into getting it myself because I want to complete this whole collection, and I think that one would be really practical as well. So that was everything for podcast episode number 6. Thank you so much for watching if you're still here. If you really enjoyed the video, consider liking the video, subscribing if you haven't already. I know everyone says this, but it really does help out my channel. It shows YouTube that you enjoy watching my videos. It also just like warms my heart when I see that, when I see like likes and comments and interaction from the community. It's really motivating to me. So thank you so much, and I will see you in my next video.